morning. I'm Kristen Balasia, Head of Automotive Advisory at IHS Markit, and welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Brian Rhodes, Research and Analysis Manager, Connected Car, and Mark Boyadjis, Automotive Advisory Technology Practice Lead. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Good morning, Kristen. Happy to be here.
We've spent a lot of time these past few months talking about the pandemic, elections, Brexit, and most recently, the 2021 outlook. I'm happy to be speaking with both of you today about the future of technology and the exciting things we've seen and heard coming out of CES. So let's talk about some innovation, albeit virtual. Brian, for those that have maybe not been able to catch a lot of the show and spending that dedicated time in Las Vegas, let's talk about how this show was handled virtually and what you would say was the most notable difference between past CESs that you've attended live and what you saw over the last week.
Yes, it's interesting because just a few weeks ago, talking to a lot of people in the industry and amongst ourselves, nobody really knew what to expect. So I think, all things considered, with this being, such a major show that had to switch digital with everything going on, it's been very successful in terms of how they've been able to lay this out and still give everyone the platform that they had traditionally in Las Vegas. In some ways, there's actually some improvements over how it's been. If you've been to CES in the past, it's running from meeting to meeting or from press conference to press conference, and you miss a lot in between. In particular, seeing what's happening around you at the show instead of just what your primary focus might be in the short term. So in that regard, it gave you a chance to sit back and look around. In particular, we saw some announcements that happened late, a couple weeks ago before traditional CES week, and even bleeding into this week, as we head out of traditional CES week. So, the suppliers and the automakers in particular that are displaying there, being able to sort of spread out a little bit to have the dedicated time that they deserve for some of these announcements. It's always better to be face to face. I'd always say that, but all things considered, I think that this is a good standard for how this type of show could go virtual going forward.
That's a great point about the efficiency and actually being able to attend or cover more ground being virtual. Interesting. So, Mark, you and I was thinking about this as we were talking earlier. We actually spoke about CES last year, and this obviously is an annual thing and an annual discussion. And so over the years, we've seen and noted how the automotive topics have really grown in predominance. What used to be, a heavy consumer show, and then, some supplier technologies bled in. And then as these technologies moved more towards vehicles and the cars themselves, and here we are today. What's the next step in this evolution that we're seeing this year?
Right. The interesting part of CES, in my opinion, this year was how tangible some of the announcements were. And that's not to say that there were no, kind of futuristic concepts that were shown, but it's just that more and more of what was on display for the virtual audience was things that are going to come to market in the next couple of years or even this year, right? There was the Mercedes-Benz Hyperscreen, which is destined for the EQS. There's the brand new BMW iDrive, which is going to be in the upcoming iX electric vehicle. There's the augmented reality HUD from Panasonic, which is in market now, and even GM's BrightDrop technologies and their announcements there, that's launching later this year. So we saw a lot of interesting announcements and a lot of, conceptual technologies, but more and more of it this year, at least from my perspective, was tangible opportunities for car companies and suppliers to put product in market now, because you really didn't have the opportunity to get someone in a buck to experience a virtual to experience a conceptual prototype. You had to kind of hit the nail on the head and hit them with what was real.
Okay, yeah. So you're telling me that I and our listeners can plan to actually sit in, experience some of these things that we've seen versus just have the wow factor that we may in fact never see with some of the previously presented technologies and capabilities.
Yeah. In years past, there were announcements around like health and wellness initiatives and emotional tracking and things that they do have a roadmap in our forecast and that we are seeing start to evolve. But a lot of what was shown this year was content that we expect to see very soon.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, Mark touched on some of those impressive announcements. we've come a long way as you listen to what, many of the OEMs and suppliers were presenting from. I just had to think about that. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. This year seemed to be all about customization, comfort, convenience. For example, the GM Celestic, the MBUX Hyperscreen. I mean, really eye-catching and really adaptive. They talked about AI. They talked about, depending on where you're sitting in the car, you can, make changes to colors and experiences, and just really quite a bit different. So can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of those things in more detail, and some of the other things that we'll be seeing?
Yeah, you can have any interior you want as long as it has a massive touchscreen. There's definitely, certain things that certainly stand out from my perspective. Of course, General Motors getting a lot of attention, rightfully so, for a number of different things. But if we talk about the Celestiq, one of two new EV models coming very short term for General Motors. It's not just a show car, as they said. It's that pillar-to-pillar touchscreen, the smart glass surface. There's a lot of very eye-catching aspects to that vehicle that you could definitely see putting a brand, all of a sudden, tech forward in the EV game. Hyperscreen is definitely one worth talking about from Mercedes, as well as the next iteration of what MBUX will become. That's 56 inches combined of screen. All those displays sitting under a single curved glass. The first, we've seen iterations of a dedicated passenger entertainment before, but not quite like this, not quite with that type of real estate and really dedicated space for that type of content to flow through to a front passenger. But most importantly, I think most interesting about that is really it's not this competition of who has the bigger screen. To some it may be, but really it's the evolution of MBUX being removing the menu layers, trying to move beyond the traditional, 8 clicks to get to something. And they've certainly made great progress with their speech platform on previous releases of MBUX. This just marks, the next, next thing down the road for them in terms of advancing that forward.
Mm-hmm.
Phone as a key is another thing that I really took away. It wasn't that long ago, we're talking weeks, that Apple made their latest car key announcement. And now we have BMW amongst the first to sign up for car key that they're branding as Digital Key Plus. So now it's moving beyond, significant announcement from Apple. Now you've got, in theory, close to, half of those handsets out there that are going to be able to support it, as long as they're, certainly newer phones. But now BMW is supporting a longer range version of that, right? That can allow you to unlock and lock your car even without taking your phone out. So we're really seeing how far that's advancing, and key there is the involvement from the tech company that can democratize that very quickly. So, we'd certainly expect a number of brands to jump on board there. It's not going to be certainly unique to BMW. One last one I think that's a good broader megatrend of this show is over-the-air updates, advancing new business models forward. So one thing I came into this show particularly interested about is what were we going to hear about 5G? Was it going to be new vehicle announcements? Was it going to be new services and capabilities and really killer applications for it? It really wasn't that, which, I would have actually expected. And certainly that was a lot of the story of 2020 CES. It was more about latency reduction, vehicle to everything communication, etc., which is sort of things that we've heard before. But now pair that to the fact that just last year we had the first 3 brands launch with 5G. By 2023, we're going to have 75 brands that are on the road with 5G. So I actually point this to, I'm not disappointed in not hearing more on it. I actually point this to seeing how far our industry has matured, in that there's this understanding that because we have these platforms built, with capable OTA systems on top, we're going to be able to add these killer applications as they come. We don't have to figure everything out before the vehicle is launched, whether it's services or UI or, gaming or different monetization techniques. That's really significant, that we can have such a large investment technology reach, I wouldn't say mass market, but a significant amount of brands, not just electric luxury, if you will, even before everything has been figured out in terms of why exactly we need it and who's going to pay that cost.
Mark, along with the tech we can touch, and as Brian was talking about, in some cases experience or benefit from, we're also seeing more in the way of business model shifts by some pretty major players like GM, Apple, et cetera. what do you think is the most or highest impact or most notable, and what does that mean for the industry overall?
So I'm glad you asked that question, Kristen, because and side note, I really appreciated Brian's unintentional digital key pun. Apple and these tech companies are the key for some of this evolution, and the reason why it's interesting to watch is because they're coming to the market with a completely different perspective. They see money in transportation and mobility, but they don't want to produce cars the same way it's been done for 100 years. And so if I extrapolate a little bit beyond of the week of CES and even the month of January, late 2020, an announcement came from BYD and Didi launching a purpose-built mobility vehicle for the Didi ride-hailing platform in China. The significance of that is you can't buy that car. Didi's not even buying that car. It's something that BYD is earning revenue off of Didi ride-hailing rides by the kilometer. And it's a fundamentally different car that has optimization for the Didi ride-hailing service, like larger doors for ingress and egress. There's rear seat capabilities that enhance the experience for the passengers. There's buttons on the steering wheel in the front so that you can actually, the driver can allow the passengers to get in and kind of activate the ride and all that. And it's just fundamentally a different business model. We saw some of this start to come out from General Motors with their BrightDrop announcement. Same idea, where this century-old company is trying something different. They're going to drive vehicles into this last mile delivery type of business model, and they're already partnering with FedEx for some of this. And it's illustrating that General Motors is recognizing the trends and now starting to put the money where their mouth is and try and drive revenue off of these different business models, all still while leveraging the cash cow that is their product sales business. And the Apple announcement further underscores that this is happening. We recently heard that Apple is working with Hyundai and Kia around their potential vehicle service in the future, mobility service in the future. I think it's notable. We've seen lots of rumors around Apple for the last several years and what they're going to do in the program that was launched and then canceled, and then they sold off technology, and then they hired more people, and it's been kind of a roundabout process. But partnering with a name brand type of platform, a name brand manufacturer to build the cars that are going to be presumably part of the Apple service. I mean, it drives home the fact that this whole industry is shifting, and that you see disruptors like Apple and like BYD and Didi and even Foxconn getting ready to make cars, and even General Motors saying, okay, well, we need to change the way we sell cars. So I think that CES as a center point for this discussion, but it certainly wasn't the only place we're seeing these announcements, and it certainly won't be the last place we see these announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a wide range of directions the industry is going in with these enabling technologies. Like you said, the vehicles, the systems, the processes, the partnerships. It's really interesting. And I think, every year we're going to see these changes. And I think a lot of people are really excited to buy these vehicles and really have the types of end-to-end experiences and conveniences that they have in their everyday life, like you said, with their smart devices, et cetera. And this is really even trumping to a certain extent the type of vehicle. I mean, what I thought was kind of interesting too, what you both mentioned, the GM Celestiq. It's a sedan, right? I mean, it was a little bit kind of grayed out, couldn't fully see every detail of the vehicle. But in a world where everyone's in a hurry to build an electric SUV, they highlighted this beautiful, well equipped, advanced sedan. So really interesting times. So final question for both of you. What did you find most exciting coming out of this show? Interesting or exciting from your kind of personal perspective? Brian, I'll let you go first.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. I already mentioned it, but I think I might say hyperscreen. And it's not, again, not just display real estate. but that's certainly eye-catching, right? But the evolution of removing layers, improving the user experience. If we tie this to all of the announcements we continually hear of another automaker signing up with Alexa or any one of these different VPAs, it really seems to be the direction that automotive user experience is going into. Number one, it's more of the look and feel, the tech that we're used to outside of the vehicle, and the structure of that tech outside of the vehicle. Number two, though, is customizing it to the driving experience and what we actually need while we're driving, and certainly what we don't need layers while we're driving, right? I think everyone can agree on that. So if you're able to pair together a really intuitive and easy to use touch surface with a well-performing virtual personal assistant, that really is a great position to be in to start advancing forward what we can do in terms of giving new services and content and things to the driver.
Yeah, and from my perspective, Kristen, I mean, other than not having to stay in Las Vegas hotels for a week, the most exciting thing to come out of CES for me was the realization that some of these, and I mentioned it, but some of these business models are shifting, and to see both established players and startups working to try and drive this CASE acronym to reality, right? Connected, automated, shared, and electrified. Everything you see out of automotive in the automotive industry out of CES and kind of the surrounding announcements is driving forward that momentum of a future mobility world where the products are different, the way we buy them and use them are different, the experiences that we have in the cars are fundamentally different. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the focus that Harman had around their acoustics and their digital content in the car. Really fundamentally thinking about how that experience changes in the vehicle from a holistic side. And it's fascinating to see how the industry is taking these things together and finally, in my opinion, not thinking about a feature to check mark into the next model for 2022, but thinking about a holistic vision where all these parts come together and create something greater.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Brian. I mean, what an interesting topic. I think we could have talked about this for another half hour, and certainly a fun one to discuss as well. So, and thank you to everyone for joining this episode of Fuel for Thought. We'll be back with more Fuel for Thought next month. To opt into our newsletter that provides more information on this topic and others, visit ihsmarket.com/auto newsletter.